This is your legacy, Attorney General Bondi. In 8 short months, you have fundamentally transformed the Justice Department and left an enormous stain in American history. It will take decades to recover. His long-standing tradition of regular oversight hearings with the Attorney General, the Director of the FBI, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. These hearings have never been more important as President Trump turns the full force of the federal government on Chicago and other American cities. The assault on the city I am proud to represent is just one example of how President Trump and Attorney General Bondi shut down justice at the Department of Justice even before the President's party, controlling the White House, Senate, and House of Representatives, shut down the government. The Attorney General has systematically weaponized our nation's leading law enforcement agency to protect President Trump and his allies and attack his opponents and, sadly, the American people. You have purged hundreds of senior career officials since you first appeared before us. These men and women had dedicated their careers to protecting the American people. As a result, the department has lost literally thousands of years of law enforcement expertise. To be specific, you disbanded the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force and the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, despite the growing threat of foreign election interference and the drastic rise in cryptocurrency crimes. You forced out almost 75% of the Civil Rights Division's career attorneys, while hate crimes are on the rise. You fired more than 100 immigration judges, while the immigration case backlog is more than 3 million. You cut the public integrity section from 30 prosecutors to 2, while political corruption skyrockets. During your confirmation hearing, I asked you about your many potential conflicts of interest as a former lobbyist. You responded under oath, quote, "You will consult with career ethics officials within the department and make the appropriate decision," end of quote. But the Justice Department then removed those career ethics officials and put in their place inexperienced political appointees beholden to President and you. And you've effectively shut down the Office of Professional Responsibility, which investigates misconduct by Department of Justice attorneys. Now, with these ethical guardrails out of the way, corruption has run rampant at the Department of Justice. Although you've been a registered foreign agent for Qatar, you did not recuse yourself from signing off on President Trump's solicitation of a free jet from the royal family, even though this gift was clearly illegal. Connections to Attorney General Bondi seem to yield more favorable outcomes for defendants. At least 2 long-running federal prosecutions were abruptly dropped after the defendants hired your brother. It's no surprise that Ed Morton, the failed U.S. attorney nominee you appointed as senior official, said, quote, "No MAGA left behind." Our nation's top law enforcement agency has become a shield for the president and his political allies when they engage in misconduct. Last year, President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, was allegedly recorded accepting a $50,000 bag of cash in exchange for promising immigration enforcement-related contracts. Under your leadership, the investigation into Mr. Homan was dropped. After President Trump pardoned nearly 1,600 January 6 insurrectionists, including more than 600 charged with assaulting or impeding law enforcement, the Department of Justice is arguing in court that these pardons provide immunity for wholly unrelated crimes in multiple cases. Jared Weiss was filmed on January 6th, encouraging his fellow rioters to attack the Metropolitan Police Department officers. And he said, "F them, kill them." What happened to Mr. Weiss? He's been hired by you as a senior advisor. In February, you said the Epstein client list was, quote, "sitting on my desk right now for review." 8 months later, you still haven't produced these files, and a credible whistleblower told my office that FBI agents were directed to flag any records in which President Trump was mentioned. The Department of Justice ordered the dismissal of corruption charges against the former New York City Mayor Eric Adams in a corrupt backroom deal to secure his cooperation with the president's immigration agenda. Acting U.S. Attorney Daniel Sassoon, a Republican appointed by President Trump, resigned in protest. Acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Eric Siebert, a Republican appointed by President Trump, was forced to resign because he didn't believe there was sufficient evidence to indict New York Attorney General Letitia Adams or former FBI Director James Comey. In his place, President Trump installed his former personal attorney, someone with no prosecutorial experience, to indict Director Comey, which she did. She joins a network of unqualified MAGA loyalists masquerading as federal prosecutors, like Alina Habba, who said she would use her position to, quote, turn New Jersey red, close quote, and Sigal Chattah, who once said that a black political opponent was, quote, should be hanging from an effing crane, end of quote. The President and Attorney General attempted to bypass the Senate to install these unqualified extremists. Where do you find these people? Courts have ruled that both Ms. Habba and Ms. Chattah are serving in their roles illegally, jeopardizing countless prosecutions by your office. Why? And that's just one example of how the Department of Justice is making America less safe. Attorney General Bondi shut down the Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force, OXADEF, which has dismantled thousands of criminal organizations. And you diverted thousands of FBI, DEA, and ATF agents and DOJ prosecutors from their critical missions to carry out the president's mass deportation agenda. Attorney General Bondi, not surprisingly, federal drug prosecutions have dropped to the lowest level in decades. Let me repeat that. Federal prosecutions for drug crimes have dropped to the lowest level in decades on your watch. The Department of Justice has also unilaterally terminated 373 grants that provide critical funding to state and local law enforcement to the tune of $500 million. The 2026 Trump budget would slash the high-intensity drug trafficking areas program known as HIDA by more than a third, from $300 million to $196 million. Instead of taking common-sense steps that have proven to help reduce crime, Attorney General, you're focusing on helping President Trump play strongman on television. He has illegally deployed troops to Chicago and other American citizens and has threatened to send more. The Justice Department defends this dubious legal basis for these deployments and diverts DOJ personnel and their components to assist in these efforts. These deployments basically target Democratic-run cities and Democratic leaders, ignoring many Republican-led areas of our country with even higher crime rates, and making clear that this is for political theater, not public safety. One particular chaotic raid in Chicago Tuesday last week, aided by the FBI and ATF, which you supervise. In the middle of the night, federal agents pulled women and children out of their beds, crashed down the doors to their homes, destroyed their apartments, zip-tied children and others, and detained immigrants and U.S. citizens alike for hours in vans. When one witness complained about the treatment of the small children, an agent laughed at her and said, "F them kids." On Friday, a federal judge appointed by President Trump held that deploying the National Guard in Portland is illegal. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller accused her of, quote, legal insurrection, close quote. At a time of rising threats to federal judges, this kind of language is inexcusable. Last week, the President and Secretary Hegseth summoned senior military officials to a political pep rally at Quantico, where the President said he wanted to use American cities as, quote, training grounds for our military. Training grounds for our military. To fight the, quote, enemy within. Chicago is not the enemy. Our fellow Americans are not the enemy. It is abhorrent for the President, who is supposed to represent all Americans regardless of political party, to describe anyone who disagrees with him in this manner. To my Republican colleagues who claim the previous administration weaponized the Department of Justice, President Biden retained President Trump's FBI Director Christopher Wray, who President Trump then fired. President Biden never directed the Attorney General to prosecute his political opponents. President Biden never fired his own political appointees for refusing to prosecute his targets. What has taken place since January 20th, 2025 would make even President Nixon recoil. This is your legacy, Attorney General Bondi, In 8 short months, you have fundamentally transformed the Justice Department and left an enormous stain in American history. It will take decades to recover. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Would you please rise so I can give you swear?
At today's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat, Illinois, slammed Attorney General Pam Bondi's record, accusing her of turning the Department of Justice into a political weapon for President Trump. Durbin said that under her leadership, the DOJ had abandoned its mission of fairness and accountability, purging career officials and dismantling key law enforcement programs to protect the president and his allies. He criticized Bondi for disbanding critical units such as the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force and the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, even as threats of foreign election interference and crypto-related crimes continued to grow. Durbin said that nearly 75% of the Civil Rights Division's attorneys had been forced out despite the rise in hate crimes. He also noted that Bondi fired over 100 immigration judges, worsening the already massive case backlog, and slashed the public integrity section from 30 prosecutors to just 2 at a time when political corruption was increasing. Durbin accused Bondi of removing ethics officials and replacing them with political appointees loyal to her and the president. He said this led to widespread corruption, citing examples of federal prosecutions dropped after defendants hired her brother and conflicts of interest involving Bondi's past work as a foreign agent for Qatar. He added that she approved President Trump's alleged solicitation of gifts from the Qatari royal family, calling it clearly illegal. The senator went on to highlight what he described as politically motivated decisions at the DOJ, including the dismissal of corruption charges against former New York City Mayor Eric Adams and the replacement of career prosecutors with unqualified Trump loyalists who targeted the president's critics. He named several officials whom courts have since ruled were serving illegally, warning that their actions could jeopardize numerous cases. Durbin also condemned Bondi's decision to shut down the Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force, saying it led to the lowest level of federal drug prosecutions in decades. He accused her of diverting FBI, DEA, and ATF agents from major criminal cases to support the president's mass deportation agenda. Additionally, he said the DOJ terminated hundreds of grants worth over $500 million that had supported local law enforcement. He criticized Bondi for defending the deployment of federal troops to cities like Chicago and Portland, calling it political theater rather than a legitimate public safety measure. According to Durbin, federal agents carried out chaotic nighttime raids that terrorized families, detained citizens and immigrants alike, and mistreated children. He described reports of agents mocking detained families and said such actions were unacceptable in a democracy. Durbin also denounced inflammatory remarks from Trump allies against federal judges and said the administration's militarized approach to domestic issues was both unlawful and un-American. He said the president's rhetoric portraying fellow Americans as the enemy within crossed a dangerous line. In closing, Durbin declared that Pam Bondi's 8 months as Attorney General had caused irreparable damage to the Department of Justice. He said her actions had left a lasting stain on American history and that it would take decades for the nation to rebuild trust in its justice system.